Okay, so I think we'll just get started. We're recording, this goes on to live on our YouTube channel and then also at the Pen Sound Archives, which is really cool because I feel like I remember being a younger writer and not super plugged in to a lot of the poetry world, but you know, discovering it online, and it's nice to be able to like find writers and then, you know, take a deep dive and listen to them reading with their actual voices when you haven't seen them in person yet. So that's all to say that I think that's cool. So welcome. Ordinarily, James Loop, our wonderful studio manager, would be saying things right now. And he's here, but he is resting because he's sick. So I'm sort of playing James right now. In the chat, James says, "Hi, y'all." Thanks, Zoe. So this is, you know, we tend to have a different theme for each season. This is the theme for this season, or like the title for this season of Belladonna's readings is Close Distances. And in each one, I've invited a co-curator to collaborate. Although this one, I feel like really my co-curator gets most of the curator credit. But I still get to be here saying words at you and listening and talking, you know, having a conversation at the end. So I don't know whether it would feel nice or embarrassing to actually read the bio of yours that I have, Poupeh. Or should I just say Poupeh Missaghi is the author of...
Just go ahead, whichever.
Yeah, Transrelating House One, which was a great novel from Coffee House that is also an amazing example of documentary poetics. And you have a new book coming out, right?
Fall 2023, probably.
Yeah.
So still some time.
Also Coffee House, or?
Hopefully.
Yeah. She's also one of the editors of Matters of Feminist Practice. She's a teacher. She's a translator. Stop me when I stop saying true things about you. She's great. And I'm going to pass the hat to her to introduce, maybe in a slightly more formal way, our two readers, and then stick around after the readings are done because we're going to have a little conversation, and be thinking also while you're listening. If you have any questions, you can pop those into the chat or chime in with them at the end. So, all right, over to you.
Thanks, Zoe. This is lovely. Thanks everyone for being here. I know it's spring almost everywhere, so people want to be out. It's also end of the semester for those of us who teach, so it's a weird time. So we're grateful that you're here. I'm going to introduce Nilufar first, who is going to read first, and then I'll introduce Khashayar later before he starts reading. So Nilufar Karimi is a poet, essayist, and translator. She's the author of Nuclear Deal 2021, which won the Noemi Press Book Award, which is an amazing book collection. Her work has appeared in publications such as World Literature Today, Poetry Magazine, Asian American Writers Workshops, The Margins, and is anthologized in Green Linden Press Essential Voices, Poetry of Iran and its Diaspora, which also is a great collection. She did her MFA at CU Boulder, and she's now doing her PhD at UC San Diego. I hope I'm getting this part right, Nilufar. I didn't know your work until you reached out to me for your book blurb, right? Yeah, so, and I was just so like blown away by the book. So I'm really happy that you did that. And I'm really happy that you're here tonight. Yeah, I wouldn't say more about the book. I want you to just listen to Nilufar. But I highly recommend it, especially like if you think about how one can weave together the personal and the political, thinking about how one exists in the world, and thinking about formal choices and stylistic choices that add to the content that you are trying to investigate. Thank you, Nilufar. The floor is yours.
Merci, Poupeh. That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Zoe and Poupeh, just for hosting us here and for bringing Khashayar and I together, because I feel like that doesn't happen very often, bringing Canadian poets and US poets together, first of all, and also just bringing poets that I love together. So thank you so much. I am actually going to read mostly from my recent book, Nuclear Deal, and then I'll also read a little bit of new work afterwards, hopefully, if there is time. So yeah, I wrote this book in conversation with and using the language of the US-Iran nuclear deal, which is also referred to as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And it was drafted in 2015. And it became really important for me to learn to write in the face of this violent language of national negotiations, to write in the face of what is missing and in the face of what is erased. And I also just wanted to say before reading that Poupeh Jan's work in Transrelating House One was so impactful for me in the process of writing this book. So just being here today feels very circular for me. On the appearance of oil tankers. The oil tankers named on page 128 of the nuclear deal in a gray watermarked chart ripple down the page, carefully forgetting to use the word tankers. In place of tankers, the word vessels is used. Vessels is used everywhere. Vessels are non-human survivors post-biological catastrophe. Dove, sparrow, swallow, Zeus, Atlantis, Ares, Hydra, humanity, happiness, courage, honesty, silvercraft, sun, ocean, horizon, majestic, native land, anthem, superior, spotless, splendor, accurate, decisive, alert, agile, success, justice, fortune, glory, destiny, infinity. Vessels, though, are also clay pots labeled 1 to several thousand from various civilizations who painted on them with animal blood and fruit polyp. Vessels are fire-grown containers, the woman in the bazaar with her toes blown up like cherries made standing up. She bent over it to give it shape. I saw her. Then I drank from a vessel, and way off in the distance, it drank from me. Fence. Today, between your home and the sky, full of its own fences, fighter jets cross for the air show. 68 persons called the police reporting an air raid. The other 2 million looked up and for 7 seconds felt something like defeat and amazement combined. It took them another 7 seconds to recognize this as terror. You were on the ground pushing at the fence with your head, your most lethal weapon, grumbling, making bubbles of spit, your hair growing in patches on your part bald head, as though not knowing what continents to form continent or country, land or water, to protect your 1-year-old gumption. Gumption, as I form it in my mouth, a good word for you, something which attempts by sticking itself to the impossible over and over again. You stick yourself to the impossible. You stick yourself to this fence. Bring a soft shoulder which, with such personal strength, I cannot hold you, tell you it will be all right. I hunch behind the spoiled Hakaranda, watch you fight your first fight, think this is terror, this is terror, this is terror. I don't have very many titles in this book, as you see. A stranger asks, will there be opera by the lake later? If I answer, there will be some kind of music. But his question comes and my answer leaves. This happens to me often here. The land around the lake is uneven, such that when transcribing the Battle of Gaugamela, Greek historian Arrian noted, we lifted, dragged, and plowed barbarians through stone-strewn land, striking barbarian faces with spears. Their general, terror smote, Dariush, panic-stricken, between stones, the beginnings of a poem composed of army ants. Exposed by moonrise, the lineage of delicate, raiding thorax carried the history of history, 10 to 50 times its weight. Similar, one encyclopedia notes, to the average Western man, strapping 50 slightly lesser limp men to his back and running. So these next 3 poems are kind of rewrites or remakes of the story Layli wa Majnun, which for those of you who are unfamiliar is kind of a tragic love story. And there's several versions of this story out there, but basically I'm remaking it, focusing more on Layli and also thinking about how the story is about miscommunication and just misalignment in time and love. So parts cut have open place. My head comes undone at the seam where the hair parts, or in this difference we part. My head comes undone at the seam, so I cut a stem with a flower on it, bring it to the old seam and cut the flower off. I used to look for the flower, but I stopped. My arm bends the same way it did, so I feel I still have it. Spring came and the flower, though dead, opened like a drawer. I did not see this opening. It did not see me. I, Nilufar, did not place myself inside it. come. I saw the life of Layli come to the opening of God. Came she with her knees showing. Have they become fish or something? Came time I saw the life of Layli leave. Her throat swam like a hinge for another door, the door of a flower, the door of a star coming apart one Friday. The shadow of every life converges here. In comes the head of the smell of the flower that came off Layli's shirt as she left. Mass against. Slow at the door of a star, Layli's shirt, yellow, slow, like a word, a gaining of mass, here in the head, in the word. What is the smell of a flower but Layli's head, turned against itself to smell a flower? We circle the bride's gold dress, pull the skirts up, pull the collar open, pull the sleeves to the floor. Upon the head of Miss Bride, we apply a light foam. It looks so good on her. Upon the head of Miss Bride, we place a pomegranate crown for confidence. We position her palms to crack it open. Upon the roasted part of her face, the seeds spread information. The groom goes away from the news. Fire, he wails. He is king, he wails. This is the last one that I'll read from the book. It's called Tale of King Ram, and King Ram is a musician. It is not as though I am not writing for pleasure, I say to a friend, who then says my double negatives suggest I'm lying. But I am writing with my back on the floor, legs up, another double negative. Sometimes this is the most giving position I can muster, I say. She wants to know if writing this is about getting pain out onto the page. So I tell her I am writing with King Ram, who I met here in the writing. Otherwise, we wouldn't know each other and that would be pain. But this is pleasure. King Ram and I in a deserted bakery full of cakes decorated with frosting presidents, frosting celebrities, but the cakes are fake. I tell her the king and I do sometimes grow so hungry, we pull drywall cabinets from their hinges, fill our bodies with wood. How this is a hard consumption, a fraught consumption, that if there is ever any pain, it does not wound, but bellows closed the wound. I'm going to switch now to some new work, very, very new work. And hopefully I can share my screen. Can you all see? Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit from a passage that is lifted from the Fingerprint source book, which is kind of a handbook or instruction manual for being able to read a person's fingerprints, and this was created and put together by the National Institute of Justice. The persistent nature of the friction-ridged skin makes it an ideal anthropological feature to use as a means of identifying individuals. The structure of the skin also provides a mechanism through which to describe distortion. If the variation in appearance between two impressions of the friction-ridged skin goes beyond the physical limitations of the skin, the impressions cannot be from the same source. Injuries and subsequent scars on the friction-ridged skin on thumb used for fingerprint, are anthropological features used to identify individuals. This means not only are we identified by our wounds, but also by our healing process, which is unique and therefore surveyed. How to unravel my fingerprints. Sweat arrives, swear sweat arrived, and fingers arrived. Sweat arrived, sweat, swear, sweat arrived, sweat arrived, swear, fingers arrived, arrived, swear, sweat, under sweat, arrived, swear, arrived, a line of sweat. The body carries its sweat around, earth around the sweat of bodies. The sea is coming and so wide, so wide. I'm gonna stop there. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for reading, Nilufar. And it's so good to see the new work as well. The new poems are also part of the chapbook that Belladonna is publishing as part of this reading series. So if you want to have a copy, you can find it later on our website. So our next reader is Khashayar, who also goes by Kes. I'm just going to read the official bio first. Khashayar Mohammadi is a queer Iranian-born Toronto-based poet, writer, and translator. They were shortlisted for the 2021 Austin Clarke Poetry Prize, the winner of the 2021 Vallum Poetry Prize, and the author of 3 poetry chapbooks and two translated poetry chapbooks. Their debut poetry collection, Me, You, Then Snow, which is an amazing book, is out with Gordon Hill Press. Their second book, WJD, is forthcoming in a double volume with the translation of Saeed Tawanai's The Ocean Dweller from Gordon Hill Press, fall 2020. And they also have a collaborative poetry manuscript with poet Clara Duplessis, which is forthcoming from Palimpsest. I can never pronounce that. Palimpsest Press, fall 2023. I also came to know Khashayar through my book, so I'm very happy that happened. I think you wrote something about my book on Twitter, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I was fangirling, and we just met online.
Yeah, and then I read your book and I was like, oh my God, I can't stop reading this work. Yeah. And I should say this, I have been teaching from both your book, Khashayar, and from Nilufar's book. And every time I teach the multilingual pieces, especially, my students are just like blown away of like, how can you create like this space to embody both languages and all these different worlds coexisting? So thank you for that gift. I'm so glad that Khashayar is here with us tonight and reading for us.
What up, what up? I have a lot of work. I want to read a lot, so I'm going to talk less. I'm going to start with one piece from my book. It's called God Gone Astray in the Flesh. And it's what Frantz Fanon uses to describe language. It's actually a quote by Paul Valery, but Frantz Fanon uses it to describe language after Frantz Fanon and Douglas R. Hofstadter. This poem uses homonyms and homophones between English and Farsi. My tongue twisting into my mother tongue entwined, a new set of vowels for this chilly night of consonants, shrill with friction like piss in toilet water. Past is lowly, a place of pasture. Past is a dialect I no longer speak fluently, and my present is hemorrhaging selves. My body, my tan, my epidermal self aching. I want to be on my knees hearing suck it, and I'll do both. Without moaning, the tongue can explore much, much, the tip disappearing. Male for man, male for tan, male to be male. The desire to arrive at the khud, become khud God in the flesh, self-aware. Self stands for self-enlightened life force. Above each self, an endless ladder of selves. Enter the tortoise with Achilles asymptotically approaching. Achilles, knock, knock. Tortoise, kia. Achilles, man. Tortoise, man who? Achilles, the who man, one pillar of the threefold path. Zarathustra's Nietzsche traveling west come cover of dusk. And taking my eyes off the LED corona of texted nudes, my witching hour sunspots supernova behind eyelids. The psychedelia of self-theft, self-loss, nebulous in its fragments, fragmented in its piercing light, oozing from eye sockets onto wrinkled foreheads, mint in mortar. I stare into mirrors that refuse to reflect till medication can herd thoughts into pasture, leash all that intrudes, till I am my own mirror, khud self-aware, self-reflective, till I know clearly that I exist. I'm going to read a few translations of my dear friend, mentor, and contemporary mystic, Shaheen Sadiqzadeh. Under the lush blossoms of the cherry tree, the knees of my lust buckled, and the body with repetition shaken off, fallen from the miraculous blossoms. And among the white bed of the ruins, the luminous embryo of awareness rolled in the secure nest of my womb. And now, without any desire, I feel a universe breathing inside me. Behind the gates of thought, a profound light at rest, a snow mote under the heat of the sun, a wise one drinking wine, a red apple, or the earth's unmanifest tether. The desert where rain comes once a year, the slow dance of coral reefs in the depths of the ocean. To reach the mountaintop, that moment at dusk, behind the gates of thought, the incident fading away, the body unmanifest, volume shattered, words lost, and sensation fallen asleep. This is the third poem by Shaheen Sadiqzadeh. The sky, clear and pure, eyes devoted to observation, words dried on the lip, illusion like a burden fallen off the back. I no longer feel, though filled with sensation of living, the feeling of soil, waves of the sea, the feeling of rain, of seasons, all of nature in my body. What a wonder all these heads and eyes and hands and mouths. These are newer works. This one is called Non-Fungible. We churn in bed, a downed plane, a proxy war. We discuss disembodied. No amount of blinking can blacken the sun. Home is material. Accused of nostalgia, we correct dream grammar with a friend as lookout. Those back alleys of pleasure and that feverish night of gender-segregated discourse. My voice still too material, still too sentimental. A labor shortage, a company pizza party, we're heroes again. I wake with my teeth bare, call it brain weather. No escape from the spectral. That cold breeze like a sadness occulted from every cracked window, and the saxophone that bleeds a teenage mother's exhaustion next door. A man screams, a woman screams. A few help, but most only understand. The aftermath is a new marketing potential for water, an ice sculpture in the abyss. We always seem to be on the precipice of a day of mourning. The extent of our charity outreaches its intent. The hungry refuse the lamb. The guilt-ridden are dubbed in the vernacular once a year. Relative security ensues. The fortune seller at the mercy of the arm hair accented wrist. On the street, hijab hovering without the women theorized inside. Through the bazaar they float, haggling over vegetable prices. Windows serving a new purpose. We announce our death prematurely to avoid pageantry. The dust in the second-hand car's wake, a migration. Dust storms come petroleum refineries, ballistic missiles introduced at the march. Exhausted cement smoke in rural factories, blood thicker than water wars. The appended car, its dead passengers, an uncanny intimacy with the virtual. Sunburnt currents like the river we won't step into even once. Somewhere in the body, a limp conveys. A rush of endorphin and absurdity quaking across generations of doubt. What if we end here, raised with no-name stock disdain for the natural? Fill this void with disposable pop ephemera. What if we end here holding hands, desiring for something? This next one is from my forthcoming book with Clara Duplessis called codenamed Fricatives at the moment. It's about the fricative that both our languages, Afrikaans and Farsi, share. Kh. Fricative 12. Landlocked, far from the tongue tip. You are now where language no longer serves you. You have passed the threshold of self-serving continuity. When you sleep on your kh, you awake khar dar galu, your own body in pursuit of inhalation. The body can only express by expanding. We are past signifier and signified now, turtles all the way downing the pursuit of gender before finding an answer towards themselves. The desire to know what is a woman before knowing what is a what is an what is an is. This next poem won the Vallum Poetry Prize. My city, the city, or wherever I'm flung into the arms of back alleys and street corner loot. The art of lower class feeling is to start at the shoe, asphalt, faulted at the foundation and sinking. I neighbor a dozen names for Allah by proximity. I build clay bowls to crush. Can you feel the durability of the mosque dome? Fill the tile cracks in color. And my city isn't my city, at least not barefoot, arms stretched, cowering under transmission towers, rain trickling metal. Not this. I'm partial to highways, having slept next to one. Wherever roads crackle beneath car tires as my ocean chain linked. Once my city was my city. Khane Badouche, says the book, pointing fingers. The nomad, no city or civilization, quote, no organ for organization, quote, seeding in ancient clothing still on shore. We watch rain roll down the street where passing through car tires and flow rivers used to be. My city resurrected in lafz, a Lord manifest in names I've forgotten. I'll study you. I'll study truth, and in words I'll manifest the truthful. A poetics of exile scribed onto the cracked bas-relief of the once imperial. A poetics of oppression scribed in blood and op for auction. A poetics of blood, a fetish for capital. A poetics of capital, the cracks of our history. A poetics of history, a poetics of exile, fruit geography, animal geography, regional mythology, black, gray, white mythos, from Khak to Khakistar. A poetics of compliance, not that Rumi, not that man tearing through the ego to rouse. A poetics of misunderstanding, poetics of demand with no supply for solace. What do you seek in us? Inert as the line folds on its own vowels, a poetics of consonants. The barrier broken. Say the word to summon the limb, say the name to resurrect the body, say the word to situate yourself inside. This next one is called a thirst bot named Istighfar. I don't know if you know what thirst bots are, but the parts of it that I do quotations are actual messages from a thirst bot called Istighfar, which I did not know that thirst bots had developed a culturally sensitive approach, but they have. I have two thirst bots. One is called Ahmad Rizqi, and one is called Istighfar. So many sinkholes for thought swept clean. Half of my life has been apologies to the left behind. So I pathologize. What if I starve myself so rivers can grow? Cracked riverbed, thirsting, I'm not here, I am thirsting, earning that inner monologue. A reverie. Be right back in 5. I begin with sugar unable to suture a series of disappearances. There were poems of war because, of course, they're always there. In an imaginative enough geography, religion too can be libidinous. Words ricochet, shrapnel map the scar tissue. How hopelessly sentimental. While lashing at the Hellespont, I doubt if Xerxes imagined houses raised in academia. Facing actualities, we too break the desired and write autonomously. Wait, can I picture Muhammad in my mind, or is that too an unlawful summon? Search until eyes are tired. Be right back in 5. I spit on circumstance, but it lubricates your understanding. Fair enough. The thief's hand is aestheticized. Our thread's been trending. I leave the screen to watch Edward Said on my phone come back to a thirst bot named Istighfar. Quote, sometimes there are no happy endings. No matter what, I'll be losing something. End quote. Among the fiction, the scholar's plight from the implicit, a scene with the ancient ruins voiced by the militia. Quote, we see our darkness as a prized possession. Without mercy, our darkness would plunge us into despair. end quote. And the wandering scholar as the measuring stone at the very heart of the bazaar. No matter who speaks, the audience is forever heterodox. Here, you tensionless being, you playful heart of the struggle. To you, we were an occasion. They cannot represent themselves, the subterranean speaks. They must be represented. But my people are disputed at the moment, caught between two fictions, currently named the middle. Quote, what I need is the dandelion in the spring, the bright yellow that means rebirth instead of destruction. End quote. Me too. Be right back in 5. This one is called A Thomsonian Ghazal for Zarathustra. For those of you who don't know, the English Ghazal writing tradition has 2 major schools. One is in the US that I'm not very familiar with, but another is created by the New Brunswick poet, East Coast Canadian poet, John Thompson. And Ghazals written in that tradition are called Thomsonian Ghazals. This is one of my favorite pieces I've ever written. A Thomsonian Ghazal for Zarathustra. The dawn suckling on my psyche. Your eyes have the hunter's glow. Me and you, we share a silence. So I dwell in the subscript to keep up. Greek gods on every corner, sex toys and Plato's spawn. Most await to hear the absolute, but I just want the finite to speak. I wait for a knot to untangle as I run my hands through my father's hair. When did body transition to person? When did a head become a unit of counting? Prophets walked this earth. And if not spoken to God, I bow simply to elaborate beguiling. A qarn, a century or similitude. A crux to reflect that single story foretold and retold. Kill the fire temple. Don't you know a new prophet has arisen? Send Zarathustra traveling west, may he meet Nietzsche. Cue theater rain. Shake the metal sheet for thunder. A simulacrum. The oceans boiling over. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khashayar. Thanks for sharing the new work as well. I'm also gonna just share the link to our chaplets page. Nilufar and Khashayars are not yet there, but they will be available next week. So you can come back to this page and find them there.
Well, now we chat, maybe. Thank you again for that wonderful reading.
Yeah, both of you. If anyone in the audience, if you have questions, please feel free to unmute yourselves or just type it in the chat, or we can just start the conversations, Louis.
Yeah, I mean, I have my question. I mean, my questions are ridiculous. I have like a list of like, what is your relationship to? And then a list of like English, Farsi, the interlingual space, translation, testimony, citation. So if you have a better kickoff question, then like everything is the question.
Maybe I also have like question about like multilingualism. So maybe that would be like a good place to start, like the in-between of the languages. And I think both of you can speak to that. Nilufar, you have a poem called Sib Zamini, which is about the potato, right? And I just love how in that poem you start from like a potato, but like play with the word in Persian and then in English and all the associations that come with it. And so weirdly, last week I was visiting a friend and her 3-year-old picked up a potato and she was like, this is a kind of an apple. And then we're like, why apple? And then I was like, oh, of course, she has heard Sib Zamini and then she has just put these together. That's like Sib in Persian is apple. So even though a potato doesn't look like an apple, for her, it's like, this is a kind of an apple. And I was thinking about your poem in that moment. And Khashayar, your poem, just thinking of the odorless poem, in which you start from boo, odor, and then like you arrive with playing with gendered pronouns. Like from this very simple idea, you take us in such weird like playfulness with like in this maze of language, and we arrive at like a queered language. So I wonder like if you both could speak about like how you play with this multilinguality, or I'm also like adding something. I think your experiences with both languages are different. If I'm not mistaken, Nilufar, you grew up here, right? And Khashayar, you came to Canada later, right? So it's interesting to see how these two languages, you have different relationships with the two languages, but at the same time, we see these similar plays that you're doing with the two in your work.
Can I start with something?
Sure.
Which is that when you were talking, there was for a while that I really tried to make this a poem and it never happened. What I found about like 27 different fruits that are named after apples. You know, there are like some like lesser known ones that are very like for example, melon is named after an apple. Like the part of the Milo, it's called Milo pepon. The Milo is an apple, or like anything that has melon in it is basically an apple named fruit. Or then you go to other languages, which is like, for example, oranges are very interesting because oranges are called apfelsin in Swedish, which is called Chinese apples. And then you keep going to these different places because oranges got around with a lot of trade. So they have a lot of different nationalities based on which country you perceive that from. I tried really hard to make a poem with it and never worked. It just became the listicle. But there's so many different, like also like pomegranates, you know. Anyway, there's so many fruits named after apples, this apple, that apple.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I think I'm also thinking of Poupeh, what you said about coming from different language experiences, and just like working with two different languages, and how sometimes it's not something that you notice if you're speaking in your mother tongue, that one word could mean like could split into two meanings. But once you begin kind of moving between two languages, you start to see multiple meanings coming out of one word, because you have to switch. You know, you're kind of asked to very quickly and suddenly cut one meaning and accept another meaning, which is impossible, of course. And so just the surprises of language that come from switching all the time, constantly. And Khashayar, I'm also thinking of the multiple kinds of fruits that are apples, and how the apple and the potato are actually very similar. Like a potato is almost like an uncooked apple. And then I'm also thinking of the like religious connotations of apples and how they come from the earth, or they were like the first of the earth. So Sib Zamini is like an apple that comes from the ground or is on the ground. Yeah, I love thinking about fruit.
Can I jump in? It feels like what you're talking, because you're talking a little bit about the sort of code switching, I guess, which puts me in the mind of, I mean, I feel like there's interpreter brain, you know, in the split second, and then there's translator brain. And I was thinking about Nilufar, what you said at the end of your book. You were talking about translation as a practice of reading. So I'm wondering about that too. Like, where does it come through from speech, or like from the experience of speech, or where does it come through as like a practice of translation? If that question, does that question make any sense?
Yeah, are you asking specifically about the book or just in general? Like,
but maybe in general, yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, this project was kind of like a multi-layered translation, because the actual agreement that I was looking at was very encrypted and difficult to read. And so I think there was a translation of the document, you know, just from like English to English that had to take place for me, because a lot of the words I didn't know what they meant, and it was intentionally done that way. If you look at a lot of agreements between nations, they are not easy to read, and it's done on purpose. And there's a lot that is sort of hidden both in the form of the text and in the language that is used. So yeah, I think that the translation process was formal. It was literally in the way that I was looking at the piece of paper, the words that were hidden in the annexes of the nuclear deal, because there were annexes. And just even the word annex, right? Just thinking of an annex as a kind of physical space, a space for storage, or it reminds me instantly of like a basement or an annex attic. So I'm not sure if this fully answers your question, but yeah, like in the speech to speech, but also in just how you are looking at a page, and the power relations that are in that, I think was a big part of why translation was kind of all over this book.
I'm so stuck on the annex thing, because it's also a transitive verb, like a country can annex. Yeah, exactly, Rashi. Yeah.
Khashayar, do you want to speak to that? Like just working between languages?
I've been a little bit, it's I don't know how to explain it. Like I have in a way, like sometimes when you speak about something so much, you exhaust yourself. I don't know. It's funny because, like, of course you here have not heard what I have said about it, but it's been asked from me so much because of my project with Clara and like all of the things that we did. And we ended up doing like a 1 hour session on it, and I blanking on the slightest things. We did like a 1 hour talk between the two of us, and we put it online, and I can't remember a single talking point. The thing is that one thing I would say working between languages is I just wish for a more imaginative translation, because I think for people who know languages, I think a lot of people who have worked cross languages, there is a lot of force to often claim that a lot of things cannot be translated. And that's something that I'm that's something that just is it just really riles me up, because I'm like, you're just not thinking imaginatively enough. You just don't want to work enough on a new tradition. You just don't want to work enough on a new style, because as someone who's just so, violently translating all the time, that's all I do. I believe in translation, and I believe in its power, and I believe that it can be it can be greater than the original, and it's I feel it's way too often it is dismissed as lesser, or again, this is not working across languages. That's I think that was more your point, but it's just like working across languages, it kind of just brings about questions of people really, really zooming in when you start to convey something from a different culture that they deem can never be conveyed. You try to it's funny because a lot of the times, because of this gatekeeping within communities, the people who make those new traditions are people from outside those communities. Like, for example, like I read a Thomsonian ghazal. Yeah, like ghazals for years, they're like, oh, it will never be the same. Well, John Thompson said, you know what? I may not be able to recreate it, but let's create a new tradition. It's something that I and a lot of West Asians who have grown up on the original language ghazals love absolutely, because it's just very reverent to the original, but at the same time it has tried something. And a lot of people come and say, well, if it was people like me who are people within that culture of ghazals have not done that because of that great barrier, that it always makes people, and it always falls into the barrier of like Orientalism, because people don't want to translate Rumi, because everyone's like, how are you going to translate Rumi? And I'm like, then how are we going to have someone that understands the original and translates it? It always comes to a point where we're going to have all British, German, white scholars translating Rumi, all English Anglophones, people who have never grown up on that language, doing the work of the first language. Anyway, sorry, I've got very far from the original. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. I also wanted to say, I definitely view translation as an act of care, like not just a transmission of information from one text to another, but a full conversation between poets, between writers, between times. It's an act of care, and when you start to look at it that way, it becomes really less important who is considered lesser or who is considered greater,
I think we were supposed to wrap up at 8:30, but I kind of want to ask another question. This act of care that you're talking about, Nilufar, I also had a question, because in both your books, you either dedicate poems to other poems or other poets or other writers, or you write in conversation with other poets and poems. So there is that sense of you're not just you're acknowledging this conversation, you're acknowledging this influence, but also creating a community of names and presences in the books. So I wonder if any of you wanted to talk about that.
Like the King Ram.
Yeah.
Well, Poupeh, that's how I think like after tweeting to you, the first time we interacted was I wrote a poem for you and I sent it to you. And I think that's going to be in the chaplet. But yeah, that's I really wish we had more time because this is a very big one. And I don't know if Nilufar wants to say something. I took the floor a lot.
No, it's okay. I noticed that is something that both of our poems were doing tonight in this talk. And yeah, I think it really comes back to creating community through writing, and also maybe it's somewhat ritualistic as well. Growing up here in the United States, these are not voices that I heard, and outside of my family space. And so I think I couldn't have written without having and acknowledging community. So simple answer, but
actually I'm gonna say something very quick because I know you need to go. But the thing is that something that I look for very strongly when I read, like, diaspora writing or any writing that crosses culture boundary lines, is whether or not people are talking to me as if I have never encountered their culture before. It's one thing that I feel diaspora writers fall into the trap of very much. And you can conflate that with age, but it's not the case most of the time. Sometimes people are writing in their 50s and 60s and they're still starting at the beginning. Everyone wants to start the discourse from the very beginning. And this act of having conversations situates you further. And at the same time, there is a stage of discourse for everyone. But when 90% of the people are trying to start from scratch, it becomes, you're like, if every time I have to reinvent the wheel, well, how far can I go? So this whole idea of creating a conversation gets you a lot further. Sometimes you have a conversation and you start hacking at the very precipice instead of starting from the beginning. Sometimes you go further. At the same time, you have to, it's not a matter of ego, because you don't have to consider yourself the beginning, and you can just be a dot anywhere on this continuum. But just the fact of, I think both being the beginning and the end is kind of problematic. To say that I'm the very, very, very borders of discourse, or I'm the very beginning of discourse, they're both equally can be problematic. And not always, but just to situate yourself somewhere within this culture and try to take something forward. Take the, it's like Nima Yushij says, do you take the load bearing off of others, or do you add to it? Sometimes you take the load, carry it for a little bit, and let it be carried on.
Thank you so much. I love ending with that, right? We just take a bit and move it a bit forward and then pass it on, right? Yeah. Zoe, do you want to say something? I think I talked a lot.
No, I think it's great. I think it's perfect. I do also wish I'm sort of like, this should have been longer, this part. But maybe we'll be able to have this conversation again somehow.
Yeah, hopefully in another space soon. Thank you both for being here, for reading for us tonight, and for everyone who stayed with us until this late hour. Thank you, Zoe, for this invitation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Well, have a nice night, everyone.
Have a nice night.
Thank you all.
Also-
Merci, Nilufar. Khashayar.
Before you go, Nilufar, I couldn't find you anywhere. Please find me somewhere. I don't know where you